Hello everyone and welcome back to the kingdom. I hope you have all had positive and productive weeks this week. So this week we are talking about sequels. There are so many different kinds of sequels out there, not just books that have come after the first one. We have prequels and interquels and midquels and sidequels and spiritual successors and parallel stories. There are so many different ways that you can write related to your original material. Now if you're already in the middle of book one at the moment, you may think, I don't need to pay attention to this video, I just need to focus on book one. Well, you'd kind of actually be wrong, because generally after book one comes book two, and that would count as a sequel. So without any more further ado, let's do this. Okay, so we all know a series where book one and two were really good, really interesting, but then the entire series started to suffer from something that I call sequelitis, and that's bad sequels that end up sort of making the whole thing feel a little bit ill. So for the purpose of this video, let's assume that the word sequel means all writing that is related to the original material, no matter where it comes in relation to the original material, you know, whether it's actually in a series or a side series or a spin-off or whatever. Let's just say all related material is a sequel for the purposes of this video. Writing sequels really is an art. It takes a lot of practice, it changes the beginning and the end when it comes to writing novels, and what people fail to realise a lot when it comes to writing sequels is that you can't do exactly what you did last time, only bigger and better. The idea itself needs to be bigger and better than it was last time. You can't just rehash what you did in the previous book, but make it bigger than it was last time, or make the stakes higher than it was last time, but essentially it's the exact same plot. That's a bad thing. Think about it in terms of movies. Think about a bad series in The Matrix, okay? The first Matrix film was really interesting. The sequels, not so much, because essentially what they were doing, the ideas they were exploring were exactly the same as last time, just with a bigger and better budget. But if you want to think of a good film sequel, let's look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and let's specifically look at the Avengers films, because I think those are the films that people are more likely to have seen. Now, the first Avengers film is a group of ragtag people, they come together, they squabble, and they end up defeating the bad guy. Now, you may just be there saying, but that's exactly the plot of Age of Ultron as well. Well, actually it's not. In Age of Ultron, the characters' internal struggles are very different. The ideas that they're fighting are very different. The idea that humanity needs to evolve is very different from the fact that Loki wanted to conquer the Earth and rule it. All of the different arcs that characters are going through, the development from the last film, you can see, particularly in Tony Stark and people like Natasha Romanoff, how their characters have developed through all of the films, how their perceptions have changed, how their beliefs have changed, and you get to experience that in the sequel, and that is what makes it a really interesting sequel to watch. So with that in mind, I have come up with a list of things that I think people should keep in mind when they're writing sequels. So let's start with number one, and that is don't dismiss the last book. Whatever you do, people are going to change in your first book. That is kind of the whole point. That is why you're interested in the characters. You are watching them develop. When you start your next book, don't just wipe all of that under the rug and pretend that nothing has changed. If your characters have defeated the tyrannical oppressor in the first book, it is very unlikely in the second book that they're just going to be home where they were beforehand, hanging out, being like, yeah, we did a cool thing and now we're exactly the same. With at the very least no actual situational development, and even worse, no character development. It's unbelievable, unrealistic, and sort of destroys the original book and makes it feel as though it was worthless, and why did you bother reading it if nothing has changed for the characters? All I'm saying is don't dismiss the original content, because that is why you've got people to read the next book after all. So number two on the list is please develop your characters. Now, why would I care about Joe Bloggs being in danger unless I actually cared about Joe Bloggs? And why would I care about Joe Bloggs if I wasn't invested in his character arc? Characters are the lifeblood of your story. They are what inspires your reader to care about the novel that you're writing. If in your sequel the characters have no development from the last book, they keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again, your characters end up being flat and your readers will get frustrated with them because you've seen them make this mistake over and over and over again and they're not learning, which only is unrealistic, but actually it's really sort of almost painful to read. And is also really unoriginal, which is the last thing that you want people to think about your book. Think about what your characters are facing in this book. Is it something old or is it something new? Maybe in the first book they overthrew the tyrannical oppressors, yay! And this character A, learned that it's good to listen and trust his friends. How is that challenged in the sequel? Does he listen to his friend and then end up regretting it, and that really creates some conflict inside him? Or now that they're facing a new challenge, maybe they overthrew the oppressors and now they're running the city, and that brings up new challenges and new questions and new moral dilemmas for the characters to face and to battle their way through. How are you developing your character? How are you making them feel and change throughout your series? Number 3, when it comes to writing a good sequel, is a good villain will develop with the conflict. Weak villains make weak conflict. At the end of the day, your villain does not have to be the same throughout the entire series. Although with books, that does tend to be the overarching theme, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. What does need to develop is your villains and the conflict that is involved for the other main characters. Your villain needs to develop and learn from previous mistakes, just like the main characters do. And that way it'll breed new conflict and will actually help you achieve on the list number 1 and 2, because it's more likely to push the plot in a new direction. So many times when I'm reading a book, you see fantastic development for the main characters, but the villain comes back and seems to have learned nothing at all from last time, which is very unbelievable. Let's stick with our analogy of the tyrannical oppressor, okay? We overthrew them and maybe they died, and the new villain for the rest of the series is his life partner, who is absolutely distraught and wants revenge, or has changed up their ideals and thinks that they can do things better, and that pushes the conflict in a new way. Or maybe the tyrannical oppressor wasn't dead and they imprisoned him and he escaped and he's now coming back and he wants revenge, or he's going to change things up, or he's changed his mind. Your villain needs to learn from the main characters as much as the main characters learn from the villain and the conflict that that's going to breed. Number 4 in making sure you have a good series, and this is the last one in this video, is make sure that you don't reinvent your series. If you have written a book and book 1 is a dystopian sci-fi, don't have book 2 become a fantasy. Sticking with our analogy, in book 1 you overthrew the tyrannical oppressor and it was a dystopian sci-fi, kind of like that in Divergent and all of those kinds of books, you know. If your tyrannical oppressor comes back and takes back the cities with flying carpets and monkeys and magic, your audience is rightly going to be really annoyed because they signed up for a dystopia sci-fi novel, not a fantasy novel. Fans of your first book are going to get really annoyed because you've completely changed up the rules of the series. If in your first book it was a horror, thriller, you know, bloody gore fest, and the rest of the series is now some love interest or love triangle, people who were fans of love interests and love triangles aren't going to get to that point in the book because they've had to have read the first one, which isn't what they wanted. And people who read the first one are going to be disappointed by the books that come later in the series because this is no longer what they wanted. Now, of course, I picked romance because it's very easy for people to say that something is a dystopian romance or a historical romance. It is absolutely fine to have romance or a love triangle be part of your story, as long as that was either the focus in the first book or it doesn't become the focus going throughout. If it's a side plot, that's great. Keep it as a side plot. If it's the main plot, great, keep it as the main plot, but make sure you know the difference between the two. And this is something that I actually really want to praise the Hunger Games for doing, because the romance triangle side of things was actually a subplot, and the main plot was Katniss desperately trying to save her sister and survive in such a horrible and brutal situation. Now, the romance triangle between Peeta and Gale and Katniss, that was actually a very interesting and, in my opinion, very well done subplot for the novel. However, what I'd like to point out is that the main plot, the struggle, the situation with the Capitol, a lot of the key plot points would still happen if that subplot wasn't there. The proposal, Katniss being taken to the Hunger Games, the way she fought, her insisting to go and get Peeta after Peeta had been captured by the Capitol. Spoilers alert, that probably should have come earlier. Anyway, all of those things could still have happened if Katniss wasn't romantically involved with Peeta. A friend would probably agree to marry you if it would save your life and the life of your family. A friend probably would insist that you go and save your other friend from torture. Those are things that is very likely to happen. The romantic subplot didn't necessarily need to be there for all of the key elements of the story to take place or to be interesting. However, it did make it a little bit more of an interesting read. You're like, oh, will she, won't she? And it drew you in further instead of changing up the entirety of what the book was about. Anywho, that is all from me this week. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Any questions, as always, throw in the comments or hit me up on any of my social media platforms and I will get back to you as soon as I humanly can. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Do you think there are other things that people should include when writing sequels? Things that they should be aware of? Things that they should absolutely avoid or absolutely include? I'm a big one for introducing new characters or having characters that you think that have gone away, come back. Big fan of seeing that, you know, and I'm a huge fan of spin-offs. If any of you read my books, you will find that a lot of spin-off or character development will happen in other series. So yeah, make sure that if you kind of like that thing, that you check out my books as well. I hope you guys have a positive and productive week this week, and I will see you all next time. Don't forget to check out my Girl Boss Girls videos, where I talk a little bit more about the life of a writer and someone who's actually setting up their own publishing company. Can you believe it? Go live is supposed to be in May. Anywho, have a wonderful week, guys. Bye!